Why do you think parents have a hard time? I don't know if you see this or in your community, like have a hard time talking about these difficult conversations. Maybe if it's something they see on the news or social media, for an older child or a younger child, why they may be more hesitant to do that.
I think that it's scary as a grown up. You want your child to feel safe, but you also don't. You need them to trust you. Or at least I want my children to trust me. I want them to know they can come to me with anything. I want them to know that I'm always going to be honest with them on an age appropriate level. If your child sees something bad, you want to tell them it's not going to happen, that everything is safe. Like you are safe and you're never going to have to worry about that. But as a grown up that actually those things, while there's a very, very small chance that it could happen, there's still that possibility. I mean, when I was her age and I tell her I felt certain ways when I was her age, and I try to remind her that sometimes that those feelings don't last forever. Sometimes you sort of evolve out of them. Sometimes you are afraid as a grown up. And so I try to find that balance with her because I always want her to feel security and safety, but I also want her to know I've been there before.
Welcome back to the Peds Doc Talk podcast. We are in 2025, which is year 5 of the show, and I get to chat with the most amazing guests that I've met in real life or virtually. And today's guest is someone that I met for 3 minutes on Good Morning America late last year. And I know a lot of my listeners know how excited I was about this. I was on Good Morning America talking about parenting during the holidays, and I chatted with the amazing Rebecca Jarvis, who's joining me on the show today. And if you don't know who Rebecca is, she is the Chief Business Technology and Economics Correspondent for all ABC News programs, including Good Morning America, World News Tonight with David Muir, Nightline 2020, and This Week with George Stephanopoulos. And she's joining me to talk about media and fear and navigating parenting with all that news out there. Thank you so much for joining me, Rebecca.
Thank you so much, Dr. Mono. We loved having you on GMA at the end of last year, and I hope we'll be doing that again very soon. And I'm thrilled to be here with you on your podcast.
Oh, well, that made me so happy to hear. That experience gave me life. I had never done live media before, and you all are inspirations. I watched you doing that every day and doing it for just 3 minutes, and the amount of work that goes into just a 3-minute live segment. I mean, people don't realize how much work goes behind news. But kudos to you for all the work you've done. Obviously, not only with your professional work and all the correspondence that you do, but also being a mother as well, navigating this busy mom life, career life. So I love getting to connect with women like this that, share that sort of love for parenting, but also just, being a badass in what you do.
Love that. And our kids are really similar in age. So we're
Yeah.
both like in the sort of early years. My son is 14 months old, and my daughter is almost 6. So we're very similar in terms of the parenting scheme right now.
Yes, and I know we briefly connected with that on when I was on Good Morning America, but like I said, I hope I can come back soon. I definitely want to connect with you more from the parenting lens, obviously being a professional as well. And so I'm really glad that you're joining me today because we're going to be talking about being a professional in the media with the work that you do. Parents often, approach me with like, how do I make sense of all the scary news out there? How much can I show my child? How to handle fear that parents may have around, the things that they're seeing and talking to their children about the media. What is the most important takeaway for our listeners to leave with by the end of this episode before we get into it?
Sure. I mean, again, we have kind of young kids. So my children are not consuming huge amounts of even the work that I'm doing right now.
Yeah.
One of the biggest things I have focused on is being present in the moment that I am inside of. And I cover the news. We're talking about the LA wildfires. I'm
Hmm.
talking to you from New York City. I have friends and family members and people who are dealing with something that I can't even fully wrap my head around right now. But I really try hard to be present with my children
Hmm.
when I'm with them. And I also try, the other big takeaway that I hope people can find in all of this, in whatever story it is the power that we have to make the world a better place. And I always find
Yeah.
when I'm in a situation where I feel like it's completely out of control, it gives me a sense of both purpose and a small sense of control to put something good out into the universe. And Well, you're the expert, and there are so many great experts out there who have the best advice on this. What I have found for myself personally, and even my children in smaller examples, that when we can find ways to take small steps or big steps to improve things, it makes us feel like things around us are less out of control.
I love that. And, you talk about experts. I understand that I do know my specialty, but I always like to remind parents that whenever it comes to these difficult conversations, right? And you're talking about the LA fires, I have felt like the last 2 weeks, recording this in like the 15th or 13th of January, it has been very heavy news cycle, right? There's been
Wow.
some, New Orleans with
Mhm.
the
Awful.
attack in New Orleans,
Awful.
and then the fires, and then the change of political administrations. That's been very stressful for a lot of people, and there's a lot going on, right? Like there's just a lot of change, and sometimes parents are always wanting to know to say the right thing, right? Like I want to
Right.
say the right script to my child. Like what do I say? And I say sometimes there's not going to be a right script. Sometimes you're just going to have to figure out what feels right in that moment, and that's the beauty about parenting, right? Like I know all the things that I'd want to say to my children as they get older, as a 5-year old, but sometimes you just gotta know and pivot and say, I don't know what to tell you. And
Yeah.
that is okay to tell your kid that I don't know the answer to that. And having that humility, having that understanding, to me is what I hope parents understand too by the end of this, is that you may not have all the right answers. You may not be the strong one all the time. And that is okay to do
Mhm.
say that, to be feel that way, that you don't always have it together as a parent.
Yeah, and I also with my daughter now, who's almost 6, we'll have conversations about things where I'll say, I I sort of draw on when I was her age, and
Yeah.
I tell her I felt certain ways when I was her age, and I try to remind her that sometimes that those feelings don't last forever. Sometimes you sort of evolve out of them. Sometimes you are afraid as a grown up. And so I try to find that balance with her because I always want her to feel security and safety, but I also want her to know I've been there before
Yeah.
because I remember when my mom would talk to me like that, and it helped me a lot when I was a little kid to sort of know that she was both strong, but also had felt the things that I was feeling.
I love that. And the collaborative approach to parenting, right? Like the fact that you are listening, you're asking the questions, and then also taking into your own childhood experiences and how your parents approached. I'll be transparent. Like I love that you are also not exposing your children to a lot of the news and being in this field. Obviously,
Yeah.
that can feel like, well, yeah, but that makes complete sense from a developmental perspective. Same thing with Ryan. We don't. My son's 5, and we don't allow him to watch news, and we don't watch a lot of news with our children in the house as it is because they're so young. But
Mhm.
because of the LA fires, it has impacted us personally because I have a lot of close contacts there. So we
Yeah.
turned on the news for the LA fires, and he saw all the fires, and he had so many questions. And he's 5. Usually those images, like, obviously very graphic images, you don't want to be showing your kids, but we wanted him to kind of see, and talk about it. And we went into that sort of helping mentality. What can we do to
Mhm.
help from all the way over here? And
Yes.
hearing what a 5-year-old can say about helping, he's like, they can come here. And they're like, oh, but what if
Mhm.
they can't come? Well, maybe we can send them my toys, like different compassionate things. Like, we talk about Mr. Rogers, like looking for the helpers, like,
Yes.
making sure that they're not seeing graphic images. But if you are watching news and they are younger, having the conversation like, hey, this is sad. It's okay to feel sad about these people losing their homes, and be grateful for the firefighters, but limiting it if we can, but opening the conversation, like you said. And I remember when I was a child, my parents would watch the news, but there was never discussion about what was happening on the news. And
Mm,
I internalized a lot of those fears. I have vivid memories of me being scared of a lot of the
yeah,
stories that I saw on the news because I never had a caregiver who talked about it with me and said, Mona,
interesting.
I will keep you safe. Like, this is like, and there were some robberies going around, and I was so scared that our house would get robbed. And I would have nightmares. And I'm
I
like,
was
all
afraid
I,
of that too,
yeah.
yeah.
And I was like, all I needed was a parent who told me, here's why we're going to be safe. Here's what we're going to do to stay safe. And that is such a small lift for a parent to do. If they're going to show you stuff on the media, let's talk about it. you
Mhm.
know?
Yeah,
Yeah. Why do you
yeah.
think parents have a hard time? I don't know if you see this or in your community, like have a hard time talking about these difficult conversations. Maybe if it's something they see on the news or social media, for an older child or a younger child, why they may be more hesitant to do that.
Well, I I'll speak to what I feel sometimes,
Yeah.
and that is when you see something really bad, if your child sees something bad, you wanna tell them it's not going to happen, that
Yeah.
everything is safe. Like you are safe and you're never going to have to worry about that. But you know, as as a grown up, that actually those things, while there's a very very small chance that it could happen, there's still that possibility. I mean, 2 weeks ago, no one would have thought that the situation that's unfolding in Los Angeles would be
Right.
unfolding, or at least a lot of people wouldn't have thought that. I shouldn't say no one. I'm sure there's people out there who are forecasting these outcomes, but I think that it's scary as a grown up. You want your child to feel safe, but you also don't. You need them to trust you. Or at least I
Yeah.
want my children to trust me. I want them to know they can come to me with anything. I want them to know that I'm always going to be honest with them on an age appropriate level. And so it's challenging because on the one hand, you want to be able to say, this will never happen. It's always going to be okay. Or, um, I think that's the biggest challenge when I think about it. At the same time, I've sort of found in those kinds of conversations where it's a really scary outcome, if it comes up, and it usually would come up for my daughter asking me a question, could this ever happen? Could this ever happen? Well, there's a possibility it could happen. It's highly unlikely. If it were to happen, mommy and daddy would do X, Y, and Z.
Yeah.
And remember, this is what we did in this circumstance, or this is what we did on this occasion. So I try to always remind my daughter of the things that we've done in the past. We've never, thank God, had a situation that's been really terrifying, but I always try to remind her of the things that we've done in the past to make everything safe. I mean, it's like she'll ask about monsters in her bedroom at night,
Yeah.
right? And it's
Yeah.
like, well, I've monster proofed the entire apartment, and well, but what about outside of the apartment? So these conversations, they can go on for a long period of time. But I think at the heart of it, what makes it complicated as a parent is you want your child to always feel safe and secure. I want my children to feel safe and secure, but I also don't want to say something to them where they go to school and somebody challenges the thing that I've now told them, and says, "But wait, for example, we haven't really talked about September 11th in our house, and yet
Mm.
we don't live that far from the September 11th site, and I know it's come up in some of the classrooms of people my daughter's age." So it's just things like that. I want to be honest with my kids so they know they can trust me in any circumstance, and at the same time I also want them to feel secure.
I love that. And, we're speaking about parenting our younger children and, talking about media exposure. Is there an age, in your opinion, and I'll talk about it as well from my experience and my feeling too, that you
Mhm.
feel like exposing them to media would make more sense? Like, do you feel like there's an age appropriate level that you're like, okay, now my child can watch the news with me? Or do you feel like you'll ever have your child watch the news?
We don't have a specific on or off
Idea.
date. We
Yeah.
don't have. Do you have one? Do you have an
So
actual
it
age?
to me, and it's a trick question, so you caught me red-handed. It's more about seeing how my child is and seeing how the
Yes.
child
Yeah.
is and what makes sense. Because, like I said, what's going on? Like, we never really watched the news with our child, but the LA fire was a big thing for us, and so we
Yeah.
turned it on. We didn't even think twice. My husband's like, "Hey, can you turn on the news?" And I just double checked. I'm like, "Are you sure we're okay watching it with Ryan in the room?" My daughter's a little young to understand, and both of them just sat. Even my 18-month-old just sat there watching, talking, hearing how me and my husband were talking about it. We made sure to control our anxiety and controlled our
Mhm.
fears in front of
Yeah.
our children, which I think is huge. But
Yeah.
but yeah, there's no on and off switch like you said. But I do know that the younger child under 7, 8 years old, just exposing them to it, exposing that to that when they're not able to have the emotional capacity to process
Yeah.
information can be harder. So it is sort of a situation by situation basis, assessing the event, but also the child.
Absolutely. And I think also there's it's kind of like, how much do you personally control of what
Yeah.
they're hearing? For example, it's you might not turn the news on for your child to hear through news
Yes.
what is happening in the world, but you might have a conversation over dinner because you know that that's coming up in school, or
Yeah.
somebody's older sibling mentioned it on the school bus. So we do have those conversations in our house ad hoc when it comes up. And I remember also back to my own childhood, my parents at the dinner table. I mean, we have dinner every night that we can as a family together. And when I grew up, my parents both worked. My mom worked, my dad worked all throughout our childhood, and they both worked long hours. And sometimes that meant we literally had dinner, when we were little kids
Yeah.
at like 7:30, 8 o'clock at night. But it was really important to them that we would do that together. And my husband and I try really hard to do that. And I do feel like that is a place where we can talk about anything that's on, at this point, on my daughter's mind. Eventually, hopefully it will be my son's mind as well.
And as a parent yourself, you already talked about, some the way you approach these situations, but when something is really hard or sad for you, like
Yes,
you obviously are in an industry where there is a lot of stuff that you're covering
it's
and
heavy. It's heavy.
heavy. Like, I mean, for me, I can turn off social media, I can turn off mainstream media and just kind of quiet my mind from the noise. But when you're reporting on it or having to research on it and hear about it, how do you as a parent navigate that and show up for your children, in a better, a calm, peaceful place? What do you
Mhm.
do personally to show up and not let that consume you?
So, one of the things that I am much more conscious about now than I was, I think, even when after my daughter was born, I think
Mhm.
I still had my phone around to some extent. And now, because my daughter's older, I have my phone around less. I really being present for me is one of the biggest things that allows me to be less anxious in its own way.
Yeah.
Like when I am with the kids, I try to be so with them. I'm not, I sometimes I delete my Instagram, I'll delete my ex just even for a weekend, just so that I am fully there
Yeah.
with them. I find that's very helpful. But it's not perfect. There's no silver bullet here that is the solution. It still can happen in life. And I also just give myself, like you said earlier in this conversation, you talked about how you might have imperfect conversations with your kids. And I give myself that. It's kind of like, it's not the one time thing, it is the bigger picture. At the same time, if I feel like the bigger picture is becoming a consistent trend of anxiety and trouble, then there's got to be like some bigger course correction there, if that makes sense.
Yeah, absolutely. And, do you ever feel, this is just a personal sort of question, but with the sad news stories, right?
Yeah.
Obviously, we know that there's a lot of good things happening within sadness. Like, I'm using the
Mhm.
example of the LA fires. Like, it's been so hard to
Yes.
see, but then I see all the people banding together and doing all the good
Yes.
things, right? But in what feels like for so many of my listeners, and we talked about since January, especially, it's been feeling like that for me. When there's sad news story after sad news story, how can you help? How do you feel you can help your children or parents can help children process the world around them without themselves feeling overwhelmed or hopeless? Like that
Mhm.
hopeless feeling of, well, everything's just falling apart.
Yes.
Like what's
Yes.
the point of doing anything when, fires are everywhere and people are
Right.
yelling at each other and all this? Like, how do we continue to do what we need to do with the feelings of hopelessness that can creep in?
I think it starts with what's happening right in front of you for
Mhm.
us. We have, for example, there is a public garden near us, and we discovered it actually because my dad happened to be walking by this garden and he saw there were a group of people who were tending to it, and he asked them, "What are you doing?" And it turned out that it's just some concerned citizens who wanted to help plant in this garden and make it nicer than it would have been had it just been sort of left up to the city. And so gardens started, my dad started gardening there. He told me about it. Now we're bringing our kids to it. That's a sort of short way of saying, I think there are opportunities right in front of us no matter where we are. This certainly was the case. I grew up in Northeast Minneapolis. We used to clean the boulevards on the weekends, and we would have potlucks for the entire neighborhood. Everybody would bring something. We'd do some cleaning up. We'd have some conversations. Everyone would go home for the night, that kind of thing. I'm trying very hard to help create something along those lines for my kids in New York and to show them that they do have the power in small ways, but planting a tulip or
Yeah.
uh, garlic. My daughter happened to plant garlic in this garden as well as tulips. Knowing that she at 5 years old can dig a hole and put a bulb in the ground, and that in the springtime we will visit and there will be a flower there. I actually personally believe that is very powerful. And I just genuinely, at the core of who I am, it's literally my wiring that if something awful is happening, then
Hmm.
find a way to do something good. Obviously, the best case scenario is that you can directly change that really bad thing. But there's so many things that need our attention. And if you have the body and the time and the wherewithal and the resources to do it, just go do it. And I think sometimes we get lost in the like, well, what's the perfect thing that I could be doing in this moment?
Yeah.
When in actuality, there's so many things around us that we can be doing to make things a little bit better. And if we just keep doing every day something to make things a little bit better, if everyone had that mentality, then I think things would be considerably better. I mean, I love
Yeah.
math. I grew up, I really liked math growing up, and I always sort of think about it as a mathematical equation. If there's like a ton of negatives in the world, but you just start putting out positive after positive after positive, that equation can be a positive in the end.
Right. Right. And I think that's so hard to realize when you're in the midst of something so tragic or so sad. And obviously that's not diminishing that experience at all, right? This is a duality situation, right? It's accepting the reality of a really difficult situation and now choosing how do I want to navigate through this difficult situation, going through the grieving process if it's something that's personally affecting you. And interestingly, the LA fire, like I want to be clear, like I went through my own grieving process, even though I wasn't even directly involved, because I
Right.
am a very empathetic person and I just felt so
Yes.
deeply and so strongly. And I know people are like, well, you weren't even involved. I'm like, it's just me. Like, this is why I can't do certain specialties in medicine because I get so sad
Mhm.
for people.
Yes.
And
Yes.
I'm like, my empathy
Your
goes like,
empathy.
I have to control and watch my empathy from getting too far into it where I can't function. And it went to that.
How do you do that with your kids?
So one of the biggest things that I'm going to talk about, because my husband's not like me. My husband's an ER doctor, and he can see
Mm.
the most tragic things. He has learned in a negative way to compartmentalize. So he basically
Mhm.
can see people in the most tragic accidents come home and be like, "Hey, what's up? Love you." And I'm like, you just had to code a 39-year-old guy. Like, how are you doing and how are you functioning right now? He's like, it's what it is. But that it's what it is a coping mechanism that he has had to learn. One thing that we both have discussed is that's not healthy. The compartmentalize. What's not healthy, which is I'm the extreme opposite, is taking on everyone's pain and letting it become my pain. So what we have sort of realized is boundaries for us and communication. So the boundaries are more for me so that I'm not becoming so involved in other people's sadness that I become sad and I can't do what I need to do to be a functioning human being. I'm talking like I went into a depression, like a depressive state with the LA fires. It's just not healthy because I still have children to raise. I still have my job. And what is the use of me being sad here doing for the people in LA? So I turn that what I get I feel the feeling and I've trained my brain enough to know, okay, I'm feeling really sad right now. I'm going to give myself a day to really feel sad, but what am I going to do with the sadness now? What am
Yes.
I going to do?
Yes.
So for me, it was creating a fundraising list for anyone in my community that may have been impacted by the LA fire. And so for
Yes.
me, what that helped me do is take my sadness, turning it into something actionable. And
Yes.
that being said, people may hear that and sometimes that's not good enough on social media, right? Oh, well, you should do this. And I want to be clear for anyone who is using their sadness or their grief to change the world, you have to do what's best for you, right? It's not you don't have to if you don't have the money to donate, don't feel like you have to donate.
Of
But
course.
if you don't if advocacy is not your cup of tea, don't advocate, fine. If you can't volunteer because you don't have time, don't. But figure out what is going to be a way that you can help the world in a sad situation. So mine is using my platform to spread positivity, right? Let's talk about good things that are happening. Let's celebrate the firefighters. Let's share
Yes.
like happy stories from this experience that has been happening so that people know that even amidst the sadness, there is really goodness that can come from a horrible situation. And then my husband's side, it's being more communicative to me about when he's feeling upset, right? He didn't do
Mhm.
that for a long time. And now when he comes home and he had to code someone who's his age, I say, "Hey, how are you feeling? You know, how are you doing?" And my husband is almost like very similar to your job in that he sees and hears a lot of negative things in the world. His world can seem to be very negative, and then if you think about like all the things that come through an ER, but he has learned to program his brain to say, what am I doing here? We are helping people. That what can I tell my son in terms of what doctors do and what firefighters do and what nurses do and all the people that are doing good in this world to help, right? Going back to what I said earlier about Mr. Rogers saying always
Yeah.
looking for the helpers is something that will always stick to me because it's not only just for the kids, it's for us too. When we're feeling
Yes.
sad, you got to look at the people who are spreading positivity. And for me, it was shutting down my social because I was getting into comment sections of people spreading conspiracy theories or people like about deflecting the sadness people were feeling about losing their homes and talking about other stories. I'm like, wait, let these people grieve. Like, let these
Mhm.
people have their moment. So it became this sort of understanding the boundaries that are needed, but also being communicative about the feelings. And then with the children, because my son is also a very empathetic person. I can see that if I'm feeling off, he shows it. He will be
Yeah.
either change his
Yeah.
behavior, he will get more needy because he sees me become less available. So it was
Mhm.
me saying to my husband, it's me. I need to take a moment and just really just take this time, talk to myself, therapist if you have one, and just take that moment and say, okay, what am I going to do to reset myself here and now be a more present child, parent for my child, which is what you just said. The weekend was off. I spent time with them, talked to my son. He asked me about the fires, very age appropriate language. What are you feeling when you see that? Oh, mommy,
Mhm.
that's really sad. Yeah, it is sad, and I think having those age appropriate discussions, listening, being honest, but filtering the details that don't need to be there. Like you don't need to say that these person died in their house in the fire. Like what does a 5-year-old need to know about that? Like they don't, right? And then providing that reassurance, emotional safety, all of that, and focusing on the people that are doing good. All of that combined has really helped so that we're not letting it consume us and go down that path of I can't function, which was happening for me to be quite transparent. And it
Mhm.
takes some self insight also to be like, where is this feeling coming from? Why are you know that you can get really burnt out by seeing people's pain. So what are you going to do to control that? Are you going to keep watching it where you know people are in pain, or are you going to shut it off and now just kind of tell yourself, I know people are in pain. What can I do to help people in pain? And if that's
Yes.
something that's important to you, or maybe it's using a platform to really just spread education about air quality and whatever it is that people are needing in that time. How can I use my expertise as an educator to really help versus just living in it and being like, oh my god, how sad, how sad, how sad, because it
Yes.
is sad, but me being sad is not helping anyone over there.
Well, I also, part of my job, and this also came up in a significant way during the pandemic when people were losing their jobs and businesses were going out of business because of the shutdowns. And I have always also tried to use my work, and we certainly do this at Good Morning
Yeah.
America to a great extent, to highlight the good things that are being done, to highlight the resources that exist for people. So in this most recent with the wildfires, I've used my Instagram to share all of the, like you, charities that are doing excellent work, businesses that are doing things, resources for people who both want to give and people who have faced losses, helping
Yeah.
people. I know one of the big things will be going forward, helping people navigate the insurance, and how to file for insurance and get the most, so that if you want to rebuild, you're in a position to do that. And that was certainly something that also came up with the pandemic, and making sure we were shining a light on small businesses and what people could do for. I remember there was all of these shops were closing, and I was reminding people, if you want that coffee shop on the corner near you to reopen when things reopen, go in. If you're in a position to either buy a cup of coffee there or buy a gift card there, like do your holiday shopping in these places, because if that's what you want on the corner in the future, then you have to give it your attention today, tend to it today. And so, I'm also a very sort of, both for my job, but also as a person, try to be solution oriented. And therefore, I'm I do my very best to try to share those resources with people, both through Good Morning America and World News Tonight, and also through my social channels.
I love that, and I applaud you for doing that because again, it is such a it is so hard to hear all of the bad and the sad and
Yeah.
news. I
And
like to
it's
be clear because
important, by the way.
yeah,
I'm not in any way suggesting that the world should be sugar coated,
oh, of
or
course not.
I'm not suggesting that we look away from it because it's all too much to bear. I'm saying that I think with that, it is always very important to me, as well as to the producers and the people that I work with, that we also give people the resources to make the best choices possible in situations that are as sometimes as tragic as the ones that we're seeing in LA.
And I think it's such a valuable point to add that including, media, social media, you're gonna get information as parents or as a person from everywhere, and so it
Mhm.
also comes down to knowing what kind of person you are. Like,
Yeah.
my husband, he finds
Right.
solace in watching the
Yes.
news. I
Yes.
don't because it makes me
Yes.
more sad, and so knowing what kind of consumer you are is
Yes.
being a responsible consumer so that you're not living on I also agree that I believe it's important to know what's going on in a healthy way around the world, just to know, right? I mean, some people don't know anything and that's fine, but for me it is valuable in some degree. But there is a limitation for me to know, well, how much am I going to flood my brain with those images, right? Like, what value is that doing? Whereas my husband could be completely different and like that, and I'm like, do you like watching, like, we watched a documentary about the fires last night. I forget what channel it was on, and he was like, I was like, do you like watching this? And I'm sitting there crying, and I said, look, sweetie, I'm going to go upstairs because this is very heavy for me. And he wasn't crying, he was fine. He's like, no, I understand. And he, being able to have that sort of relationship where he knows that we're both completely different, that
Mhm.
I want to know but it makes me sad, he likes to know because it gives his anxiety some sort of solace and comfort, which is completely different coping skills, but we know that, and then we can better teach our children that and know what they need as they go up and become, consumers of information as well. And I look at that as like a teaching point, right? Like, how are we
Absolutely.
going to be healthy consumers of information, so that we can take what we need, know, feel the compassion if we want to feel the compassion, but also say that, you know what, people are struggling. How can I do something bigger and better, to help people around the world or around our communities, with what they may be struggling with, and be an advocate and be, a voice of change, because I do think that the news and media can help our children do that.
Yeah. I also think something that you've been talking about, and I feel very fortunate for this. My husband and I have really good open communication. That doesn't mean that we don't argue. We
Yeah,
certainly
same.
argue.
Same.
But we both know that we're in it. We're in it
Yeah.
together. And so when we have arguments, and we do have our arguments, there's always this acknowledgement that it's kind of like it's not over, that it's a
Yeah.
conversation, and we're both in that conversation with the best of intentions for our family and for our children, and therefore we'll keep working on it until we get to a place where we both feel really good and solid about the outcome.
Yeah, and what a nice segue to, like, I feel like sometimes people forget that communicating with children is very similar to communicating with peers. That
Mhm.
same concept of like having that open communication, that it's never over. Like with children, like, my I heard my son. We watched the news and then we went to go play in the park, and he was telling all the friends about the fires in California, and I was like, oh
Yeah.
god, because I don't know what the 4 year
Their
olds on the
parents are
playground.
gonna call you later.
But it was, and I overheard it, and then I didn't run up to him and intervene. I like to just kind of do like a Lord of the Flies
Sure,
parenting style in
sure.
the wild. Like, let's see what they're talking
Yes,
about. But
yes.
then I brought it back and I said, hey, I saw you talking to your friends about it. Was anyone interested in what you had to say? And he said, no. And I'm like, that's okay. So, sweetie, sometimes like you're going to be interested in something and people won't want to
Mhm.
listen about it. And that's okay. You can always talk to me about it if you want to talk about it, if you're feeling anything. So keeping the open line of communication, that this isn't the end. Like, just because people are
Yeah.
not talking about it or just because you're not talking about it, I'm here. And the reason I
Mhm.
like that is that I don't want this to ever become an anxiety situation for my
Right.
child, that they saw something like I did when I was a kid. No one ever talked to them about it, and they felt they were the one who had to, you know,
Own
fight the
it.
robbers
Be
and
it
fight, like,
internalize it.
have to take care of the house if there was a fire.
Yeah,
That no, like,
yeah.
we're in this together. Like, our family is a family, and we, like you
Mhm.
said earlier, I think was such a valid point, that you have to be honest, but you also, that yes, we may not be able to protect our children from everything, but here's what we can do, and here's what we're going to tell you, and here's what we can, can do in this situation. And here's what we're going to control, because that's important for our mental health as well as parents navigating the world of what feels like overwhelming. And
Mhm.
I think social media has added to the overwhelm because me and my husband were talking about like long time ago, you can turn on the news and then turn it off and it was over, right?
Yeah.
Like you saw it and then you turned it off and then you went on your day. But now if it's in your pocket all day every day, you can always be inundated with
Mhm.
the images, with
Yeah.
but it's on you to say what is
Mhm.
enough for you as a parent so that you don't transfer that to your child as well.
Yeah, and I think that applies to advice too.
Yes.
And just there's so many there's literally something for anybody that exists in the world, and you do have to find somewhere in your core, you have to sort of, or at least for me, find peace with the choices that you're making. As you were talking, it made me think of something that I often do with my daughter. And again, I don't know if this is right, but it works for our family. And it's on a much lesser scale, but when you were talking about your son, whether or not his friends were interested, something I do all the time with my daughter is with Isabel, she'll say, well, I like the color blue, for example. Mommy, is blue your favorite color? And I'll
Mm,
say, like, no, it's not. I mean, I like the color blue, but it's not my favorite color. Or, mommy, I like pancakes. Are pancakes your favorite food? I
yeah.
like them, but they're not my favorite. My point is, I really want her to know that I love her, that she can love me. We don't have to like all of the
Yeah.
identical things in order for everything to be simpatico. And I don't I I don't know what that's leading to, but it feels important to me that I let her know that because it's kind of like, I guess as she gets older, if one of her friends, like, the sort of old saying, if your friend jumps off a bridge, you don't have to do the same thing too. My dad used to say that to me when I was a
Yeah.
kid, and it did resonate. I don't know if parents say that anymore, but it kind of worked for me back then. But I do think it's sort of like alluding to that same idea of be true to yourself. It's okay that you enjoy the color blue and pancakes, and your mom is sort of like so on that, you know?
What a good example though of I love that we can talk about younger parenting because like I said, I do believe that like people forget that it is very similar and um that is setting a healthy foundation for interaction in her future, right? Like whether she gets into a
Yes,
friendship, romantic
yes,
relationship, she's going
yes,
to know that you can have differences with people, whether it's politically,
yes.
whether it's
Mhm.
about like where you're living in the country, whether it's about
Yes,
foods that you like. Like you don't always have to, like you said, be on the same page about everything. But what we can do as a family and as people in communication is have effective communication skills, right? Like,
yeah,
I think we know that so much of these world's problems can be solved by effective communication, like in all aspects with parents and children, with marriages, with friendships, talking about how we feel and saying, hey, yeah, I don't like blue. And it's so interesting because you're right. My son does the same thing. And it is this sort of, we're on the same team, but sometimes the same team is not going to like the same stuff. And that
right.
is okay. And we can
Yeah,
still be part of this amazing family and like different colors or like different food. And without saying, well, you have to do this because otherwise I'm not going to be your friend, right? Like,
mhm,
no, I've seen parents do that. Like, well, if you don't do this or if you don't do this, I'm like, I'm going to withdraw my love. I'm like, oh, whoa, hey, like, this is not how we're going to approach that. We are going to have differences. Me and you, me and your dad may have differences. Like,
right, right.
I love letting my son see me and my husband not argue, meaning like yell. People think arguments is yelling, but I'm talking just having disagreements.
Disagree.
And yeah, and seeing him see how we navigate disagreements because I grew up
Yeah,
in a house where there was never visual representation of my mom and dad disagreeing and how they overcome disagreements. It was always agreement. And that's not healthy for a child to see only agreements. They need to see how a mom and a dad or two caregivers disagree and how they overcome it because these are life skills. And talking about this whole conversation, this is all foundational, right? We are setting an open door for talking about difficult news, difficult feelings, difficult things which could be differences for children too. Like my friend says that she doesn't like ponies anymore and I love ponies.
right,
Okay, well,
right.
well,
Yes.
that's okay. Do you still get along in other things? Yeah,
Yeah.
mommy, we still love playing. That's awesome. Talk about what you love with her, right? Like that's literally
Mhm.
what this is setting up a good foundation for that we don't have to always love the same things.
Right.
I
Yep.
love this. Rebecca, we could talk about parenting on our own podcast. Let's do this. Let's do the podcast. And I
Go
love, by the way,
Dr. Mona.
I love that you said that you're, you said this a couple times that you're not the expert, but I want to reiterate, like I said at the beginning, that I want all of my listeners to know, and this is my platform, not just from talking to you, that you are experts and that you may not know the right thing to say, but sometimes not knowing the right thing to say is the best thing to say. And
Mhm,
I'm like that too. I love
mhm,
looking at my husband and saying, what do we do now? Like,
mhm.
and even though I know parenting and know all the evidence based, quote unquote, like sometimes there's no book or person that's going to tell you the right thing to do. Sometimes you got to figure it out, and that to me is the most beautiful thing about parenting is learning how to navigate those tricky moments and saying, and then you see it work and you're like, oh yeah, yeah, like know your philosophy, know what you want, the values you want to raise your child with, and then you'll those words will come. Like you don't need to
Yes,
know the right things to say
yes.
all the time, you
But
know.
I think your point about knowing your values and sort of knowing your North Star, that's also really key in all of this. And that really does that's what sort of grounds me. Like I wish for my children that they will be good human beings, that they will
Yeah,
respect other people, that they will show kindness in the world, that they'll stand up for themselves, but that they'll also, show mercy. It's
yeah,
like that combination of justice, mercy, all of it. So it's a balancing act. That's the thing. It's a balancing act. So sometimes I think you kind of said something like this, but it's like there is no perfect answer, or at least
yeah.
I sometimes feel like there's no perfect answer to the question, but we're all trying to navigate it and being patient. And oftentimes it is the case where I'm exhausted or my husband's exhausted, but we're just trying to do our very best in that circumstance.
I love it, and that is a
And then
sign
tomorrow's
of
a new day.
exactly. You always get a new day, a new chance, and there's always time to repair. It's not over. Like it's never, and that's why I think it's so,
Yeah.
that's why I
Yeah.
love talking about parenting. It's never
Yes.
over. You're
Yes.
parenting these children for the rest of their life in different
Yes.
degrees. Obviously, different interventions as they get older.
Yes.
But that is the beauty about that. And Rebecca, this was just so nice to chat with you. What would be a final uplifting message for everyone tuning in today?
Oh my goodness. I mean, I guess I would say, Dr. Mona, I wish everybody grace, and I hope like just feel that I hope all of this makes you feel lighter as a
Mhm.
parent. That would be my greatest hope for everybody, that you recognize that it's hard for everybody.
Yes.
And maybe the idea is to look more inward than it is to look outward. I know we just had a conversation. I hope everyone keeps listening to Dr. Mona's podcast, but
Yes.
like we're searching for all of these answers out there, and maybe the sort of quieting down and just looking inward is the best that we can do for ourselves, especially in a time like this.
I agree. And where can everyone go to stay connected? Obviously with you, and
Yes.
I, like I said, I hope we can connect more. But for now, where can people stay connected with you?
I'm all over social media at Rebecca Jarvis, Jarvis. And I hope you'll send me messages there. And if you strongly agree or strongly disagree with something I said, let me know, because maybe the thing that you're challenging me on will help me learn something new. I try to learn from everything. So I really appreciate
Well,
it,
I knew
Dr.
I loved you with that growth mindset mentality. Look at that. This is what I'm talking about. This is the sign of a healthy parenting aspect, is that
Thank
you have a
you.
growth mindset, willing to learn. I love that. And again, so happy to connect with you. For everyone tuning in, if you love this conversation, please make sure you share it on your socials, tag me as well as Rebecca, and also leave a review. It really helps the show continue to grow. And I cannot wait to chat with another guest next time.
Can't wait to have you back on GMA, Dr. Mona.
Yes. Oh, yes. It's happening.